Hi everyone, this is Richard. In this video, we're going to do something a little bit different. I haven't really gone over Dart or Flutter at all in the past few months, actually, and I thought that would just be fun to do something, just review the state of Dart in 2018. It didn't really turn out to be that fun because, man, this thing is taking a long time to do. But hopefully at the end, you'll give me a thumbs down and I won't have to ever do something like this ever again, all right? But still, let's have fun in the meantime while we're doing it. So who am I? Well, not really anybody. I'm just a hobbyist who likes to learn Dart and programming in general, but it just happens that Dart is the only language I really know well. I know little bits of this and that, but nothing to speak of and not enough to even pass a test. So I just know enough Dart to have a good time with it and have fun with it, although sometimes it's super frustrating. I don't know anybody from the Dart team, so this talk will be based upon my experience as a beginner as I learned and advanced through learning Dart to today. So a brief history of Dart. It was introduced back in 2011 and intended to be a web language from the very beginning. There was an internal memo where their goals were stated that they wanted to use it to replace eventually JavaScript. They since, very quickly backed down and said, no, that wasn't our ultimate goal, but it's not that that's a bad goal, right? It's just that it wasn't very politically popular that idea came out. Because originally it was meant to fix the deficiencies of JavaScript. I think everyone will agree that JavaScript has its deficiencies. Where we'll disagree in terms of how bad it is. So some people will say, oh, JavaScript's a wonderful language with some deficiencies. And some people will say JavaScript is a terrible language because of those deficiencies. Where you lie on that spectrum, I don't really know. But all I'm saying is that there are deficiencies that Dart was supposed to try to fix. And I think they actually did. It meant to be a familiar language with some benefits. It was not intended to be revolutionary, spectacular in some bizarre new way. That was what some people thought it should be, but the Dart team was very clear. We didn't want it to be that way. What they wanted it to do was just, if you knew JavaScript or you knew Java, that you could just learn very quickly and pick up Dart within a few days. That was the whole goal of it itself. And again, I think they succeeded in that goal as well. When it first came out, the features were supposed to be batteries included. That's in the beginning. This is how you should develop it. This is how you could develop it. And these are the supporting tools that we have to help you out. So it wasn't just, oh, here's our language and go ahead and figure it out. No, here are the tools that go along with it to help you. It was intended to be a fast language, and it was. Many times these just-in-time compiler or interpreted languages are known to be, or have your reputation to be, slow, but Dart was supposed to be much faster than the average JITted or translated or interpreted language. We used the Dart editor for easier development. That was just you downloaded the Dart editor and used it, and it was great. And we had Dartium, which was the Chromium browser with the Dart VM as opposed to the JavaScript VM. The plan was to use in the Chrome browser, Google's Chrome browser, to have the Dart VM and the JavaScript VM side by side. And they also had optional typing. And I'm not familiar with a lot of languages that have optional typing where you could use both. I know there are some, but I'm not familiar with any really popular one that has optional typing, which I personally thought that was a great idea. There are some criticisms behind that, and some people don't actually like it, but again, my personal opinion. But then as time went by, changes came along the way, as they always do. Small changes sometimes turn into big changes. The plans to include the Dart VM in Chrome was canceled. We'll talk about this a little bit later. And so Dart was used to compile into JavaScript and run in any browser you wanted to, but Dart VM was no longer going to be in Chrome, and it was officially squashed. Dartium was continued to be developed, but only for testing purposes. So you get your code, you test it very quickly in Dartium, but if you want to actually compile it and actually put it into production for a web page or a web app, you would actually have to compile it into JavaScript and run it in whatever browser you wanted. And then there was Angular Dart, and the Dart team was very clear they wanted to put all of their weight into Angular Dart as the official supported web framework. So JavaScript has multiple different frameworks for which are incompatible with each other for the web itself. And that's one of the problems, is that all of these, like Angular JS or Angular TS, TypeScript, or Ember or React, there's a whole bunch of different frameworks which are not compatible with each other. But the Dart team wanted to say, hey, we're just officially supporting one, and that's it. For better or for worse, I thought that was a good idea too, but again, there's other people who would criticize that strong of a comment, that force put into just one framework. And then Dart Editor was dropped, and it was no longer supported, and in favor of WebStorm. And again, they put all of their weight and said WebStorm is the official supported IDE or editor for Dart. And that was a little bit of a problem for me, as WebStorm was not, it was neither free software nor open source, or it wasn't even freeware. So I didn't really like that, but fortunately there were alternatives that went along the way. But I think to this day, WebStorm for web support is still the officially supported environment. Then Dart 2.0 started to come into focus. And the question is, what did they want it to do for Dart? And it was kind of interesting in how it seems to be described to me. So the picture that I am getting was Dart was good the way it was. But then another team of developers said, wait a minute, we need a language to do something, and we need the language we need a language to do what we want it to do. Where are we going to look, and what language are we going to pick? And what seems to have happened was a team, and they're now called Flutter, they basically said, we want to develop a framework or a platform to develop software, one code base, and turn it into an app which you can use on Android and iOS. So one code, compile it, and play it on Android and iOS. But there was a problem. You couldn't do that with a lot of applications because iOS actually forbids you to have a VM in your software. So you couldn't just get Dart code, download the VM on your iPhone, and start playing it. And that was just Apple's rules. So they had to find a way around that. They could, and so this was a tough thing for them to do. And what they thought was, that's how I think the Dart was evolved. And they changed it so you could actually compile it and run it on both Android and iOS. And the only way to do it is ahead of time compilation. So you would get the code, compile it into a binary, and you would be able to run it on any platform because it's in a binary form. Okay, so that's where Dart 2.0 really came in, where the Flutter team, again, I could be wrong about this, but this is where it seems like it happened. They came to Dart and said, hey, we could really use your pro language. It's a great language. It's free for us to use. And we have direct, because they were in the same company, Google, they were able to interface with them and say, let's work together on this. And I think that's what happened. And so it was ahead of time compilation. We still have the capability of the JIT, but ahead of time compilation is there. So you can do either one. It had stronger typing. So when you have ahead of time compilation, so when you get a source code and you compile it into a binary, you have to have stronger typing. The dynamic typing is only good for JITted programs, not ahead of time compilation. So that was the importance. They wanted to keep the optional typing though, so they strengthened type inference. And I think I said this in a previous video, where type inference is if you give the value to a variable. So you get a variable and you give it the value of of something. That variable will remember that the value has a certain type, right? The easiest thing is if I say variable A equals 1, the number 1, we know for a fact that A is now an int. And so you cannot get the variable A and equal it to a string or a class or anything like that. It has to equal an int from then on. You didn't declare it being an int, right? But that's the type inference. It infers from what you value, the first value you initialized it, that's the type it will be from now on. So you still have the optional typing, you still have the dynamic typing, but it's much stronger typing that allows you for ahead of time compilation. I don't know, but I think that was awesome. Other small changes, keywords new and const were optional, and I think that's nice. If you're old school, continue to use the new and const, but you don't need to inside of there. And new is, in case you're not familiar, is when you're going to instantiate a class, okay, or create an object. And then we're using Dart dev C instead of Dartium. So all code run on the browser is now going to go ahead and get compiled to JavaScript and run in the browser. But if you have a big, huge, massive code that's running in the browser, it takes forever to just compile into JavaScript. So what Dart dev C is that if you make some small changes in your code and you recompile it, you don't have to recompile the whole thing. You just recompile that small change into JavaScript, and then it runs on your regular browser. So Dartium really isn't necessary any longer. And that's a nice feature too. And then there's the new build system to replace pub. I don't know anything about this. I gotta be honest. I'm looking at this and the documentation really wasn't that clear at first, and I had to look a couple of different places. Finally, I found it. I think that's gonna have to be a new video in the future, unfortunately. All right. Now, what's the future? So, Flutter, web applications, and Fuchsia. Let's talk about those. So, Flutter, I think everything seems to be moving to mobile. So I think that's where a lot of the resources are being thrown in for Dart. And like I said, I don't think it was an overtly purposeful move to Dart. I don't think it was one of those things where they said, ooh, let's use Dart from the beginning. No, I think they sat back and they looked at the types of languages that would be good, and they said, oh, this Dart happens to fit what our purpose is a lot. We have to change it a little bit to make our goals align, but it didn't take a lot because Dart was a very good language to begin with. But then again, if it wasn't for Flutter, I don't think we would have seen the same type of Dart 2.0. It would have been a little bit of a different picture compared to this. And huge amount of resources are placed into Flutter. It seems to me that almost all of the effort is going into Flutter now. A lot of the developers who were working on the Dart as well as Angular and stuff seem to have moved over to Flutter. I don't know if that's true or not, but there's a lot of effort. But it's probably just because there's a lot more work to do. When you think about it, if you're going to develop for a web platform, a mobile platform, you have to do everything, right? You have to make all the widgets, you have to make all of the appearances, you have to make all of the underlying structures of it. It's not like a browser where or a web application where the browser does a lot of that for you, right? The mobile phone won't do that for you. You have to start creating a framework. So it's almost as if Flutter is almost as if you're creating a browser and the language and the framework on top of it from the very beginning. All right, so it seems like a lot of resources are put into Flutter, and so I think Google is very serious about that. When it comes to web applications, it's Angular Dart. I don't see any significant move to other web frameworks. This is both good and bad. So if there's no other web framework, if you don't like Angular, you're kind of stuck. But if, at the same time, if we have Angular Dart, and if you have, well, let's say, for example, you have Angular JS or Angular TS, you might not like that, and you might go to React or Ember.js or something like that. You may go to some other framework, and that may be perfectly fine. But what happens if you start saying, oh, now I'm going to switch jobs, or I'm going to join this other project, and they're using a different framework? Well, now you got to learn the whole new framework again and do something different, and you still might not really like it. So having multiple frameworks, it can be very good if you're a hobbyist, you're doing your favorite hobby, but when you're working on something with other people or a pre-existing framework, or even for your job, maybe standardizing is a good thing too. Okay, so I personally like, yes, you have this Angular Dart, that's all you got. For the goods and bads, you may not like it, but at the same time, if you're going to get a job on that, or if you're going to help somebody out with a project, you know it's going to be Angular Dart all the time if it's going to be a web framework in Dart. And as time is going by, it's separating more and more from AngularJS and AngularTS. It's almost to the point where they should even call it something different. But it is separating. The code bases and the teams themselves are different. So it's going to be a little bit different as time goes by. It's going to get more and more different. And by the way, it's different enough that I actually picked up some books about AngularJS and I try to apply them to Dart, and some of the concepts are there, but the code is different. And so you can't just get, oh, I know how to do this in AngularJS, now I'll be able to do it in Angular Dart. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. And then Fuchsia OS. So Fuchsia OS is Google's not so private operating system they're working on from the very core up, from the kernel all the way to the user space libraries, to the drivers, to everything. It's being developed in public, and nobody really knows what it's being used for. And I've said this before, I don't think even they know what it's being used for. They just don't know. Now, if I was an executive at a company, that's all I'm speaking about because I don't know anything else, right? But if I was an executive at a company, would it be preferable to use something like the Linux kernel that has other development teams, or would it be preferable to use something that your company owns so you could do whatever the heck you want with it with absolutely no restrictions whatsoever? Well, I think the latter would be ideal, right? So you could do whatever you want with absolutely no restrictions or at all whatsoever. I think that would be ideal. So for an executive at Google or any company to say, we want this to be to replace Android, to replace everything, to be in everywhere, why wouldn't they want that? Now, are they gonna throw all the resources and just say Fuchsia OS is the future? Well, no, that would be silly too, because you can't just get like Dart. You can't just get it, throw it out, and just make sure everybody adopts it, because they won't necessarily. And you might lose a lot of users if you did something like that. And Fuchsia might not work out. So what is their ultimate goal? I think it's pretty easy to say their ultimate goal for Fuchsia OS is world domination. Because why wouldn't it be? But will it actually go up? Will they try to actually make it dominate the world is a different story. Because, wanting that is different from actually being smart enough to try and do it overall. Because some parts of wisdom, right, is don't do too much and don't get yourself into trouble. And Fuchsia OS might fall into that, but who really knows? So that's why a lot of people are asking the question, what does Google want with that? I don't think they know yet. It's not finished, it's not fixed, it's not mature yet. Hoping, but they don't really know yet. Neither do we, and that's why. Okay? If it takes off, so does Dart. So Dart's going to take off if Fuchsia takes off, because Dart is part of the material design. It's part of the operating system interface in the very beginning. So it will be huge if Fuchsia OS is going to be the new operating system of the future. Even if it doesn't, if it becomes a failure, if the people look at it and say, "Ooh, this is really just not good. I'm not interested. I will go with Android. I'm going to fork Android and do whatever." If the planet decides to do that, Flutter will still have a place, okay? And so will Dart. But it will compete against React and Xamarin and Ionic. I can't remember what Ionic actually is, but it's one of those, write the code, compile it, and you can run it on both Android and iOS. So these are the different frameworks. There might be some others out there, but it's going to be one of many. So it still might have a significant role in development future for mobile applications. Now, wow, this video is getting a little bit long, but unfortunately, this is going to get even longer, okay? So as a beginner, as an outsider, these are some lessons and opportunities that might be actually interesting. And these are lessons that if you are going to go develop your own piece of software, and you want other people to use it, and you want to really be, it to be a big community behind it. These are lessons that you may actually learn from this, because from an outsider, I just had some insights that I wanted to share. Documentation. If you're going to have a project like Google, or any project like if you develop your own software, documentation. It's always the first complaint. So it is, if you go make a program or a framework or an app, something, and you ask people, well, what do you think about it? The first complaint they're going to say is, you need to work on the documentation. All right? Every single time. Dart's documentation, I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's awful. Okay? In my opinion, just my opinion, it's really, really, really bad. It is super unorganized. It's not clear. It's computer generated, and it's terrible. Now, am I going to go ahead and say that this is a really a problem? Well, I'm not even going to go that far. It is written for experienced people, so as an inexperienced person, I don't even understand half of the stuff. And it is automated, but writing good documentation is hard. It really is. It's time consuming. It's hard. That's why very few people do it. So I am not going to sit here and blame anybody that their documentation isn't good. I'm saying it's important. But I do understand it is really difficult to do well. And it is one of those, if you are writing documentation, it's completely, it's one of those things that you get absolutely no credit for whatsoever. But if it's not there, or if you make a mistake, then people could jump all over you saying how crappy this is, like me, right? So I'm very sympathetic for not having good documentation. But I will throw in that if you have good documentation, that will carry you a long way. In the beginning, when we were talking about Dart and it came out, many of the Dart team would say, ask your questions on Stack Overflow. And I'm going to come out and say, if you have to ask a question on Stack Overflow, that's an automatic fail. Because it means that your documentation is a failure, right? It is inadequate. And again, I'm still not giving them a hard time because, again, documentation is hard. I agree. But I wonder if this attitude of, oh, if you don't understand, just ask it on Stack Overflow. I wonder if that is if that is part of the thinking behind it. Because if some people think Stack Overflow, oh, just ask on Stack Overflow. We have 18 trillion entries on Stack Overflow. I think that's actually a bad thing. Because some people could see it as a good thing, but I think it's a bad thing because you shouldn't have to ask some of these questions. I ask some of these very basic questions on Stack Overflow, and I shouldn't have to. I should be able to look through the documentation and answer these own questions rather than search Stack Overflow and find an answer there. And I've done that many times too. So why isn't that in the documentation? Again, it's hard. I understand that. But if you can work on documentation, look around. When people ask, say, what can we help you with? It'll always be documentation. That's always the first complaint. So keep that in mind, all right? Then there's the community, the Dart community. It's really lacking in size and it's lacking in interest. That's a pretty bold assertion, right? When you look up AngularJS, look how many books are written on AngularJS. It's a lot. It is a lot of books out there written on AngularJS. How about Angular Dart? How many books are written? Not a single one. Last I checked was like a month ago. Not a single one is written in Angular Dart. I would buy it right now. Not a single one. And the books that are written on Dart, I originally meant to have make some videos on like a book review and say which books are good and why. I got to be honest, I didn't really learn almost anything for any particular book. I wish I could point to one book or one reference and say, ooh, this is a great one. Everybody go to this one. I just can't do it. So people are saying, oh, well, the language is new, so that's why it's not that popular. Yes, it's new, but it's not that new, okay? So we have to keep that in mind. It is about 7 years old. It's not old by any means, but it's not like it was born yesterday either. And some of the things, and I will point to the Dart team. Some of and maybe not the team, but I'm not picking on them because, again, this is difficult stuff, and it's easy for me to sit here and tell other people what to do. But quite honestly, if I was in their place, I'd do a worse job than them. I'm going to be quite fair there. But some of the things, for example, when we got the browser and there was a plan of putting the Dart VM in Chrome, and that plan was canceled. There was a lot of really bad talk after that in Google Plus and in some of the forums. There was really a lot of bad feelings about that. And my take of that was, you got to do what you got to do. If you don't have the support, if you have to put your resources in something, you just can't. That's just not what they could do. It was a shame, but I understand. But I gotta be honest in terms of I think they lost track of the developers versus users. Users, I mean, would be like a user of a phone. Like if you have an Android or an iPhone, users are one thing. You want to build a pipe, you want to make it so wonderful, and so they'll go out and buy something. Developers are a different animal altogether. Developers aren't like that. They don't just jump on the next shiny thing and shell out their money. Again, I'm not a developer, so I'm not saying that that's true or not, but I don't think so. And so what Google seemed to have done at this point in time was something called moving the goalpost. It's kind of like, all the time, yeah, this is what we wanted the whole time, and this is all wonderful and fantastic now that we're not having to put resources into this, and this is going to make it so much better. And I really would have appreciated a little bit more insight into it instead. Because from what I thought of it, I thought it was more of, hey, we have only limited resources. And if we're going to make this language successful, we have to cut some corners here. Or we have to make some sacrifices. And this has to be one of them. And I really, truly believe that that is the best sacrifice to make. I would have appreciated a statement like that much better than a marketing statement. Anytime you're going to try to market, again, your platform, your thing, if you're going to say there's all good and no bad about your platform, you'd be surprised it absolutely never works. Anytime you try to tell somebody, this is all good, there's no negatives at all whatsoever, and this is what our plan was all the time, and you move the goalpost, everybody will always call you on it. And Dart really lost a lot of credibility in my eyes when they did that. And I thought that was very, very disappointing. When they just seemed to move the goalposts, oh, that was never our goal in the first place, and they pushed speed in the very beginning. Go through the old videos. They talk about how fast Dart is, but then they said, oh, that was never our goal to begin with. It was just development and just giving people's choices, and that turned me off a lot. And it's a shame. And I think that's because they lost the track between the developers and the users. And as a community member or as a community leader, if you become one in the future, or if you are one, separating your audience and knowing your audience is really going to be super important. So don't forget that. Another thing about the community is releases always seem to be so vague, and this is a characteristic of Google. So one conference they asked, so when is Flutter going to be released? And I've seen several forums where people ask, when is Flutter going to be released? And one answer is sometime, and the other answer is, well, don't ask when it's going to be released. Why don't you just look for what features you're looking for? And the problem with that is because that's not the question they asked. They actually asked the question of when it's going to be released. Why don't you give them an answer? What is wrong with something like that? And their argument was, well, we don't want to disappoint and delay the release in and of itself. But I would point to something like the Fedora OS. Fedora OS is an operating system. It's a Linux distro that's developed by the community and backed up by Red Hat. And they are chronically late. They are always late. And it's a joke that they're always late. However, and this is, again, the audience is users, but at the same time, they're advanced users. And whenever people say, why are you so late? They will tell you, we're late because of this. These are the blockers. We cannot release until this is fixed, this is fixed, this is fixed. And every single time they say that, people seem to be fine with it. If you're open about it, we are waiting for this and this and this to be fixed, therefore we cannot release, and as soon as it does, we will release. That seems to have a lot of credibility rather than simply saying, oh, maybe sometime. Now, why is it important? Well, first of all, if you know your audience, questioning them isn't always the best thing. Sometimes it is, but usually it's not. They want to know because they want to know. But if I'm going to read those people's minds, because I've never asked that question, but if I'm going to read their minds, one of Google's reputations is they start a project and they cancel it. They cancel it without significant warning, and they're all done. So with Dart, the question has always been, when are they going to cancel it, right? Or are they going to cancel it? Now, if you have a release date and a plan and a future and goals, isn't that going to be a little bit more reassuring that they're not going to cancel it tomorrow? I would think so. And I think that's the question that people are really asking is, how do I know that this is going to be supported? And Dart's answer is, oh, it's supported in web apps, web ads and stuff. Well, that's not doing it. That's not solving the answer. That's not helping other people. You could say that it's being used in Google all you want, but unless you're addressing the community's issues, you're really not getting a lot of credibility. And again, I understand this is hard. You don't want to release too much or too little. I'm not sure why, because it's developed in the open, but maybe there's some reason. So I'm not going to criticize too much, but from my perspective, from a perspective of some weirdo on the internet who doesn't know anything about anything, that seems to be a big recurrent issue. Finally, organization. When it comes to organization, everything is in organization. Documentation? Why is it that documentation's a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here? I just said before, I was looking at the web dev, the new build system. The documentation, you clicked on it, and it took you to the GitHub location. It didn't have the documentation. I had to look for where the documentation was for the new build system for Dart. It wasn't very clear. Why? Packages. It would be nice, wouldn't it be nice in the packages if you, for example, you wanted a package that can simulate a nuclear explosion, okay? So you get a package, I'm not saying that there is one, I'm not even sure if that's doable, but you have a package and you download it and it will simulate a nuclear explosion. Wouldn't it be cool if you could just go to the packages API and pub.dartlang.org and just type in nuclear explosion and it would take you to that package and it would give you the documentation on that? That would be really nice. But then it would be nice to get a little bit more detailed. So if your documentation was good enough in the packages, you should be able to search it like Stack Overflow. And when in Stack Overflow, when people ask, how do I do this? You should be able to type that into the packages and the documentation should be good enough and organized enough that it would actually show up the packages that you want. And they would remove duplicates. Now, this is part of the organization. Part of the trouble with any group is grassroots versus dictatorship. So is the dictatorship organization going to appoint a board and they're going to say, there's duplicate function in this package and this package, so we're going to kick this off and we're going to support this one. Or we're going to have this one and this one and this one all together for different purposes. Is that good to have a board determining, kicking out duplicates and requiring better documentation? Is that a good thing? Or is it a good thing to let the grassroots, just let the people upload the packages? The benefit behind dictatorship is stronger organization and stronger quality. The better thing for grassroots is simply, well, you'll get a lot more stuff inside here. If you have a dictatorship, a group of people telling what to do, you might not get a lot of packages. You might get 5 really good packages, but that's it. But as opposed to if you just let everybody upload things, you'll get 18 million packages, but of varying quality. So that's always the importance between which one are you going to do? Are you going to be more grassroots or more dictatorship? Which one? Like I said before, I liked it when they said Angular Dart is the supported web framework. That was great. Dictatorship. This is the way it's going to be, all right? As opposed to, hey, JavaScript, let's just put 15 trillion different potential web frameworks up there itself and see who likes what. But I think it would be beneficial more to hear for the packages, for the documentation, if you had more control. Not necessarily dictatorship, but there's always a fine line. You make too strong of a dictatorship, and you're going to piss people off and they're going to go away. You make it too much grassroots, it's going to be poor quality, poor documentation. You're going to piss people off and they're going to go away. So we have to walk that fine line. I personally think Dart is doing more grassroots, not enough dictatorship. Again, I wouldn't do it any better. I would probably do it much worse. Everybody would walk away. But that's a thing that we have to keep in mind. And again, if you're going to be in charge of or a big part of a community in the future, keep in mind, which one do you want to do? There's goods and bads of both. Okay, guidance versus control. Are you going to guide the community in one way, or you can control them in the other when they go astray? What is the right way? That depends upon your philosophy and what you want. Finally, so in conclusion, Dart does have a bright future. Okay, so for all the goods, for all the bads, it still does have a bright future. It's a great language. It's going to still have growing pains. It's still a small language. It's still a small community. And it's going to evolve in ways that we're never going to be able to know. Who would have thought it would be on mobile back in 2011? It may be one of a number of other platforms, or it may be the platform of choice. We'll have to see. But I think it's always going to be there. No language or framework is perfect. Dart is no exception. But ultimately, if we're going to go with the original goal, the original plan of Dart, it's going to provide developers with a choice. And it's going to probably be a very good choice at that. Thanks. And again, if you click the dislike button, then I won't do this ever again because, wow, this was painful. But really, thank you for your time if you went this far. Or if you fast forward to the future, to the very end, smart going. All right, thanks.